Good evening, Brookline Booksmith. I want to welcome all of you to this event this evening. We are here featuring, of course, Nora Lester Murad and her book, Ida in the Middle, and we are in conversation with Areen Bahour. But before we have the beautiful chance of listening to these brilliant speakers, we request you keep your mobile phones on silent. And if you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book, I have them back there. I will also be selling them if you find yourself now in need of this book after attending this talk.
Multiple copies.
Multiple copies, all of the copies. Just let's make them disappear, right? So I want to thank Areen Bahour for moderating this event. She is the Director of Implementations at Y Systems. She grew up in Palestine, but relocated to this wonderful Boston area to pursue her degree at MIT. Areen holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering and a minor in Comparative Media Studies. After graduating, she launched her career in the tech world, focusing on software implementation and professional services. In parallel to her career, Areen invests her time volunteering to aid in highlighting the Palestinian narrative abroad, and these volunteer initiatives include the Boston Palestine Film Festival, where she has been an organizer since 2018 and currently serves as the treasurer of the board. So all of this to say, the perfect moderator for this evening. And fortunately, we are so excited to have this wonderful author here for you tonight, Nora Lester Murad. I'm so happy to see you here. She is a writer, educator, activist, co-author of The Rest in My Shade, a poem about roots, and editor of I Found Myself in Palestine, stories of love and renewal from around the globe. She is also an adjunct professor of humanitarian affairs at Fordham University here in the US, but is an activist living in Palestine. So her work currently focuses on promoting racial justice among communities in Palestine. She is the founding executive director of, I'm going to mispronounce this, Dalia Association, which is a Palestinian community foundation. But enough from me. I'm excited to listen to these speak. So we're here to talk about this beautiful book, Ida in the Middle, about a Palestinian American girl who eats a magic olive. So join me in welcoming our wonderful speakers this evening.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? It's lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I am honored and thrilled to be here with Nora. I got a preview of the book before most people, so I also feel very pleased to have read the book. So we'll do some conversation about the book, we'll talk about our personal experiences. I will try my best to keep some time at the end for you to ask Nora questions as well. But to kick us off, since I know probably most of you have not read the book, Nora, maybe you can summarize the book for us?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here and to see some folks that I didn't know were going to be here and some that I did, so thank you for coming. Ida in the Middle is about an 8th grade Palestinian American girl who is ridiculed and bullied at school, and like a lot of kids in that situation just wants to disappear and be invisible. Unfortunately for Ida, it's 8th grade and she's got an 8th grade capstone project that requires her to talk about her passion in front of the whole school, which is mortifying for her. And so one day, trying to procrastinate, she stress eats, which is what we all do when we don't want to do something. And she stress eats from a jar of olives she finds in her kitchen that came from her mother's family in Jerusalem. And she eats these green olives and is transported to the life she would have had if her parents had never left Palestine to move to the United States. Ida is, on the one hand, relieved to feel normal and a sense of belonging in Palestine that she never had in the United States. But Palestine is scary in a different way. Her home, in fact, her whole village is under demolition order by Israel. And so it turns out that the US is scary and Palestine is scary. So Ida has to decide where she wants to be, who she wants to be, and how she can learn to raise her voice against the injustices in both of her homelands. That's the story. How did I do? What did you think? Was that
Wonderful.
fair?
That is fair. I think that covers the plot spot on. I think for me, it's interesting. Every reader will have a different interpretation. So I does like looking in a mirror, being stuck between Palestine and the U.S. Which one is home? Where do I belong? I grew up in Palestine to a Palestinian American father, so a huge part of my family is in Ohio, glorious Ohio. And a Palestinian mother who grew up in Palestine. So I was born in Ohio, raised in Palestine until I was 18, and then made the choice to come here with my family's support to pursue my education. Thought it was going to be a 4-year journey. 10 years later, I see some people laughing who have had the same experience. 10 years later, I'm still here. And the dreadful question of until when or when will you go back, I don't have the answers. But to me, Aida's identity struggle of where is home and the journey to accept that both places can be home, and you somehow feel lucky enough to have both, but maybe sometimes not good enough in either, because part of you in Palestine will always be American and part of you in Boston will always be Palestinian, the bigger part in my case. So that's what the book is to me, through the beautiful storyline that Nora shared. So speaking of just the book and what it represents, I will start with a general question. What was the inspiration behind the book? I know at the end you mentioned that you wrote this in your time in Palestine. I actually met Nora and her family while she was in Palestine many years ago. Was there a particular moment in time that the idea for the book came along, or what was the more general inspiration to write it?
There were a couple inspirations. One is just that my children were voracious readers. I couldn't get them to take their noses out of their books, and I wanted to grab their attention. I was fascinated by what is this Percy Jackson, and how come it's so exciting that they literally cannot put it down. I felt challenged, like, ooh, could I write something that exciting? And it turned out I didn't have to go as far as the fantasy of Percy Jackson. I just had to look at my own reality as a mother raising Palestinians in Palestine, which is actually exciting, if not necessarily in a good way. But that was definitely one major inspiration. Another inspiration for the Ida character is actually my middle daughter, Jassy, who you know and have known a very, very long time. Jassy is a middle child in all the things that it conjures. Not exactly knowing where she fits, trying to look to her older sister, to her younger sister. They both seem to be more directed or knowing what they want, and just trying to understand Jassy through the character of Ida that she inspired. That was another inspiration. And then that was my inspiration for writing it, but my inspiration for publishing it was completely different. Because maybe some people write a book to publish it. I wrote the book to see if I could write the book. And then I decided to publish it because although my husband who's right here, and I raised our 3 daughters in Palestine, when we came back to the United States in 2017, I became aware really aware, like deeply in my soul, aware of how little people in the U.S. know about Palestine and what it's like for children there. So I did feel that, okay, this book I wrote to see if I could do it, it could actually maybe accomplish something, and that was an inspiration for the decision to publish it and then to revise it, and in the revision to incorporate some of my daughter's experiences in the United States.
So a book about Palestine in a world where so much is controversial, really everything can be controversial, is surely gonna stir up some of that. Anything about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will bring some controversy. The book does a phenomenal job through Ida's story. When she takes a magic olive, she imagines herself back in her village, and while she's in the village, the book captures things that, as a Palestinian, everyday reality: checkpoints, threat of home demolitions, men and children alike being detained under the umbrella of administrative detention and being taken from their homes in the middle of the night, interactions with the soldiers, just a lot of the everyday life that unfortunately we as Palestinians normalize, but reading it from my apartment in Boston really gives a different perspective. But I think what is reality and somewhat unfortunately normal to me is going to potentially stir up other thoughts about how Israel is being represented in the book. So I am curious what your response would be for anybody that in any way is offended by how the conflict is represented through Aida's eyes in the book.
Well, I guess in my regular activist life, I'm used to it. I certainly am familiar as someone who grew up myself in the United States, who is Jewish myself and married to a Palestinian Muslim, aware of the range of reactions that I can get when I bring up the topic of Palestine or Palestinians. I guess my soapbox these days is to really try to point out to people how the narrative has been so distorted that everything pro-Palestinian is perceived as somehow being bad for Jews, as if there's a zero-sum game, and that you have to choose one or the other, and anything you do for one will be bad for the other. And while I think that's been true for a long time, there's like an acceleration now that you may or may not be aware of, because there's an effort to redefine what anti-Semitism means. And the redefinition is not only about Jew hatred, which anti-Semitism has always meant Jew hatred, and hopefully everybody is opposed to that anti-Semitism, but now they're incorporating criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. And this is problematic because Palestinians talking about their own life experience are like anti-Semitic because they're talking about their own experience. And so that zero-sumness of the current narrative and discourse is something that I expect I will confront and have to deal with as people perhaps push back on a book that's unapologetically pro-Palestinian and also shows a lot of the reality, albeit through kids' eyes, of what's happening under occupation.
Yeah. Thank you for answering this. I hope that there is not pushback, but I think we've learned to expect it when something is about Palestine, so thank you. Speaking about controversy, you mentioned that you yourself, you're American, you're Jewish, so you wrote a book very much about Palestine, about Palestinians without being Palestinian yourself. Well, I think there is immense strength in that, and I actually value when anybody non-Palestinian or an ally of Palestine writes our story, because it resonates outside of the borders of Palestine, I think sometimes a lot louder. Again, not everybody may share my opinion. So the same way you may anticipate some pushback about the perception of Israel or being unapologetically pro-Palestinian in the book, do you think you will get any pushback because you wrote a book about Palestine without having that identity, at least by blood, like by time and by choice, but not being Palestinian yourself?
Right. Yeah, I feel kind of sensitive about that. You know, I'm the first one to say that it's important for people to represent themselves. So I do feel sensitive about that. I have to say that although I'm not Palestinian, I'm a member of the Palestinian community. I have been for 40 years or something. I lived there and raised my kids there for 13 years and worked there for more years than that. So what I'm being told by Palestinians like you is that I should write what I know. And that even though I'm not Palestinian by blood, I am writing from my experience mothering Palestinian kids. That being said, though, I do believe that if people are only going to read one book about Palestine, it shouldn't be my book. People should read books about Palestine by Palestinians. but I also want people to read my books. So I'm thinking of it as a gateway book, you know? Like you got a gateway drug. I want my book to be a gateway book. And in fact, the launch of it, which is a process, and tonight is part of that process, I've crafted the launch so that it cleaves open space for Palestinians. I'm not doing any events without Palestinians, where Palestinians are not just interviewing me, but sharing their own experiences. So if my book can be an excuse and a platform for more Palestinians to speak publicly, I think that's hopefully a good thing. And then, you know, I don't know what more to say, except I think it's a legitimate, I think it's true, and that's why I want to be honest about who I am and who I'm not. And who I am comes with some maybe shortcomings, but also a lot of personal experience and knowledge and stuff to add. And one more thing I would say is that every time I say this, Palestinians say, oh, stop saying that. We need more books. There are not too many books. Your book is not displacing anybody else's book. And so I keep trying to remind myself of that as well. There maybe are some fields where they're so crowded that when a new book comes on, it displaces an existing book. Palestine is not like that in English. There just are not enough books at all, and there are definitely not enough books about Palestine for children. So trying to feel okay about it.
I second that voice. For one, I'm very thankful that you wrote it. I love the description of it being a gateway book. It was hard to put down, and I'm not somebody who reads all the time. So I even told you, like, I will try my best to read it by the time you and I were scheduled to speak. I had it done the next day. I couldn't put it down. It is so refreshing to hear a very heavy topic from the perspective of a 14-year-old. It's just a much easier way to understand the humanitarian aspect of it, and then you might be intrigued about the home demolitions and the checkpoints and the human rights that goes with that, and you might want to read research papers and other books. But I, for one, would add it on the list of books to read about Palestine, so definitely would add my voice there. So you mentioned the book being true, and you're writing about what you know. I cannot agree more. It was incredibly relatable. As I said earlier, Ida is almost like a mirror to my 14-year-old self, even my current self, honestly. And there were a couple of passages from the book that truly resonated with me very, very loudly, I would say. So if you don't mind, I would love to ask you to read a couple of them. I think they're worth it to share, and I can give the commentary as to why they hit home very strongly. So if you don't mind reading when Ida explains about her name, I think it's page 13.
Sure. Glasses. It was one thing in the 4th grade when the kids at Andrew Jackson Middle School started making fun of her name. They said she had an old lady name, and the boys ordered her to knit them gloves and hats and slapped each other on the back laughing. Ida tried to explain that her name was not pronounced I-da. It started with an ayn, an Arabic letter that doesn't exist in English. She touched her neck to demonstrate how the sound starts way in the back of the throat and how it kind of wavers like the ah sound you would make if you were falling off a ladder. All that did was whip up the other kids. After that, they waved their outstretched arms in circles and pretended to lose their balance whenever Ida walked by. She told them she didn't mind if they pronounced her name Ida, as it would be in English. And it was true, she really didn't mind. But it didn't matter, because by 5th grade, it was rare that anyone ever spoke to her at all.
So when I was introduced, the name was Areen Bahour, but my name is Areen Bahour, like Ida. It's the same exact first letter. And that sentence of like putting her hand on her throat to describe and saying it's not a letter in the English word is an experience I have to this day. So I introduce myself as Areen now. I've been here for 10 years. It's a lot easier. Some people catch on that it's not necessarily my real pronunciation, and they ask, and they then try really, really hard to roll their R's, and the R's are not a problem. They can roll their R's great. Explaining ayn and how to say it, and seeing every wonderful intention of humans to try to do it is definitely something that I experience in my job, in everyday life. And as me now, I really don't mind. I feel very confident in my identity. It's not a big deal. I answer to any variation. I answer to Irene and Eileen sometimes too. It's fine. But thinking about Aida and being a 14-year-old in a US middle school and having that go into the bullying and the people making fun is, I think, a simple thing. It's not political. It's about language. It's about the immigrant experience. It's about people being sensitive to where we come from and to language. And I don't know, it just, when I read it, I realized that I may let the American pronunciation slide way too often. So that definitely spoke to my experience in the US. And then the other piece that I would love to share as well.
Before
Go
you
ahead.
do, I just want to say that I'm glad you said it's something like relevant to the immigrant experience, because part of what I wanted to do in the book is to really put forward what's unique and especially difficult and especially beautiful about Palestine and Palestinians. But I also really wanted to put forward what is very common. Common for kids, regardless of where they come from, common for immigrant kids, common for kids whose parents don't speak English as a first language, common for kids whose parents are conservative. A lot of things that pretty much maybe a majority of kids these days experience. I want not just Palestinian kids like you to see themselves in Aida. I want all kids to see themselves in Aida.
And I think it definitely highlights that, because the experience, like I said, for that, the bullying, the nervousness about her capstone project, these are universal experiences for any 14-year-old. It's not just a Palestinian 14-year-old in the US. There was a passage about Aida talking about her appearance. I think it's page 30. I would love to share that with the audience as well. It was another piece. I'll comment after we read it on how that one made me feel.
I didn't mark it, so where are we? On page 30. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Ida was resigned to her exotic appearance. For the most part, she considered it a blessing that she could pass as anything. When she visited her best friend, Carolina, in her parents' restaurant, she passed for Salvadoran. When she went to the city to pick up Dania at ballet class, she passed for Greek or Italian. The only time Ida couldn't pass was when her parents spoke to her in Arabic in public.
So I always think a good book brings a range of emotions. Like, you giggle at certain points, maybe you tear up a little bit. When the grandfather was telling the story of how he left Palestine, I definitely was emotional. One emotion I did not think this book would bring out was guilt. And reading that passage made me feel guilty, because in my mind I was like, come on, Aida, what do you mean you're trying to pass as something other than Palestinian? Like, we should be proud to be Palestinian, we should be raising our voice. But I did the same thing. I still do the same thing sometimes. There are situations in the US when I am relieved when someone assumes I'm something else, just because I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with the discussion. I don't want to deal with, like, does this mean you're Muslim? Does this mean you can't eat pork? Like, all these things that come with that assumption, or worse. You know, in the book, one of the bullying pieces was somebody writes the word terrorists on her desk as a 14-year-old. So when my first job out of school, I traveled a lot. So I wasn't always in the wonderful and liberal Boston. And so a lot of times, you know, usually Latin Americans will assume I'm Greek or Armenian or somewhere down the Mediterranean, and then non-Latins would assume that I'm Latin, and I would let it slide or just be like, I'm from the Middle East, no need to talk about it. So that passage made me feel very guilty, because I was mad at Aida for doing that, and I didn't realize that I do it myself. But I had to ask myself, what are the circumstances that push us to do that? As a 14-year-old or as a 20-some-year-old, it's still the same. I'm curious if this is an experience you had when you were in Palestine, or maybe your 3 daughters had, living between the two. You know, does this represent anything from a personal experience?
Oh my gosh, it completely does. I mean, I can't even begin to think what story to tell. whenever we are out together and my husband with his accent speaks and someone says, where is he from? I have to like calculate, like, what do I say? Who is this person? How are they going to react? How long do I have to have this conversation? Am I willing to just speak and walk away, or do I have to do a whole education with it? I make a point always to say Palestine and Palestinian, not just Palestinian, because you also have to say Palestine. I make a point to say that, but I can't say that I ever say it without all of those calculations. Now, from what I hear from my daughters, it's just as bad. When we first arrived, and we would be in situations where somebody would say to one of my kids, where are you from? And they would say Palestine. More than once they were told this is not an appropriate setting to discuss politics. And then, you know, my daughter, who was 14 at the time, would be like, but that's where I'm from. She had lived there from 11 months old. She was unable to speak about my best friend from 4th grade, or the time when I this, or my teacher who said that. There was no thing she could say about herself that did not happen in Palestine. So to be told that who you are is political, and the implication is that it's somehow confrontational. To be who you are is confrontational. Well, that's hard for a kid. Then you grow up, it turns out that to be who you are is criminal. I mean, being Palestinian is being criminalized. And so yeah, there's a lot of personal experience that I can say, and it's not even about me, but stuff I've witnessed within my family and other friends. It's deep, and it's another reason why I feel that I have to use those terms as often as I can, so that they get said.
Absolutely. It was a learning lesson from the book for sure. I think I will calculate in the other direction now to make sure that I am not letting that slide whenever I
Whatever
can.
calculation you make, you shouldn't feel guilty.
Yep.
Because it's all just figuring out how to be in this world, and other people will beat you up. You do not have to beat yourself up too.
I appreciate that.
That's the mom in me.
So I talked about how relatable it is. We talked about the name. We talked about the exotic appearance that we just discussed. There were simpler things like the taste of pickles. All my friends that are here will know that I always talk about how pickles here do not taste the same. So there's very accurate small pieces in the book that truly captured what it's like to be Palestinian growing up in Palestine. I know you spent significant time in Palestine, but I imagine there might have been some additional research. So I'm curious about the process of finding. So there are things that are from personal experience, it sounds. Were there any other avenues of research that you used in order to capture the Palestinian experience?
Mm-hmm. I don't know about professional writers, what their process is, but for myself, it's really hard for me to get into the sensory part, like what does it look like, smell like, feel like, if I'm not there. So the parts in the U.S. are real places in my mind, you know, like Ida's apartment in the U.S. is the apartment of my daughter's first babysitter. It's an alewife. Y'all know alewife. There are these two very big high-rise buildings, and the front one is Ida's building. Now, it won't say that. It doesn't even say it's in Boston and Cambridge, but when I'm writing about the apartment and I'm imagining the kitchen, it has to be a real kitchen in my mind. And so I don't know if that's lazy writing or if everyone does that. I don't know. It was the same in Palestine as well. So when I got stuck on something, I would go out. I would just go out of the house and go someplace and talk to someone and see something. So for example, there is a pendant in the book that Ida gets from her aunt. And in the American timeline, she's never met her aunt. Her aunt has passed away. And she wears this pendant and she rubs her finger over the engraved Arabic, sometimes when she's nervous or she needs a little reassurance. Well, when I was wanting to write that, it felt so kind of shallow, like I was just, I mean, you wear one, everybody does. Everybody wears something that signifies Palestine. So I knew I wanted it there, but I couldn't bring any depth to it. So I went down to the Old City in Jerusalem, and I walked around to one of the if you've seen pictures of the Old City or you've been there, it's gorgeous, narrow, covered, old stones with shops crowded in on all sides, and there'll be certain areas that are mostly food or mostly jewelry or whatever, and then there's places that are mixed, there's places that are more touristic and places that are more local. And I went and found a shop owner who had these pendants. He was doing silver, not gold. And so I just said to him, if I wanted to buy something that would give like protection for someone who's frightened or in a dangerous situation, what would I get? And he went, you must buy. And then he went over and he went through all his very, very, very genuinely. This was like a big thing that I had asked, and he took it very seriously, very seriously. Old man, he goes over, you should buy, and he picks one out, and he says, you have to buy this one. And he said, I'm going to bless it for you, but then you have to say the blessing on it, and you need to say the blessing on it every time this happens or that. He took a long time explaining it to me, and then he did the blessing on it, and then he sold me this pendant, which the obligation that he felt to protect me was so palpable and so beautiful that I was able just to take what it did in my body and to bring that into the book. So that is one example. Another example I would give is there's a scene in the book where the soldiers come into Ida's village, and they pull all the people out of the apartments and they put them in the downstairs left apartment, all of them, like 50 people from the building. They put them all in there with a soldier with a gun, and they lock them in there so that the rest of the soldiers can go to the rooftop of the building and do surveillance. Well, I couldn't make that up because what do I know, right? So I interviewed a former Israeli soldier, and the person that I interviewed is named Micha Kurtz, who's kind of well known as being one of the founders of Breaking the Silence, an organization of Israeli soldiers who are telling the truth about what they themselves did. So I spent hours with Micha, and he told me what he himself did when he participated in the siege on Ramallah in, what was that, 2000?
Multiple times. One of them was 2000.
The one, yeah. I think it was the 2001. And he just described it to me in excruciating detail. Every one of those details is in the book because you can't make that stuff up. You don't want to misrepresent it. I wasn't there. I don't know. And he told it to me and was so glad to share it and to explain it, to answer my questions, and to have it represented in the book. And then, of course, I wrote it down and sent it to him and got his approval and all that. So there was that kind of research as well.
That's amazing. It does, as somebody who's lived in Palestine in 2000, it does resonate as well. I think I chose some of the more personal passages to read to try to keep the light and heavy balance in our discussion. But I had the license plate, I guess that's what you call it, on 2 tanks memorized for maybe 10 years. I don't remember it now anymore, but they were parked in front of our house for a good 2-3 weeks. And they took over our neighbors across the street, our neighbor's apartment, and they did the same thing. Everybody was outside while they went in. And then I would literally see them sipping coffee from the porch across the street from our own. And we weren't allowed to leave, we weren't allowed to go to the grocery store. We would just have 2 hours on Friday. You're allowed to go do whatever you want, and otherwise you're home. So it was definitely, it brings back visceral memories of that. Some that maybe I have pushed way back and suppressed. It's not the most fun image to remember, but you've definitely captured it in a way that an audience that hasn't lived it can at least understand or try to understand what that would be like. You mentioned briefly the aunt that gave her the pendant. She was one of the characters that I actually was struggling to think what she represents. As you mentioned, she never meets the aunt in the U.S. timeline, but when she takes the magic olive, the aunt has a big presence. She's a journalist, seems to be kind of the tough one in the family, going out in the field. And maybe the answer is just, she's part of the plot. But I am curious if she represents anything more than that for Ida and for the book.
Well, I think for Ida, her aunt is, I think Ida's mother really sacrificed a lot. She left her family and moved to the United States with her husband. She lost her sister, and it was already a very small family. And she didn't pursue in the United States her interests as a journalist. She ended up as a receptionist at the radio station instead of being a journalist, and she had sacrificed a lot. I wanted Ida to have another woman who she could imagine a different path also. And so her aunt is the one who didn't get married, didn't have kids, chose a career unapologetically, and also is very authentic about the trade-offs for Palestinians in Jerusalem, because as you know, and some of you know, Palestinians are fragmented by Israel. So the legal status, the social and economic and cultural opportunities for Palestinians in the West Bank versus Palestinians in Gaza versus Palestinians inside Israel who are citizens, and Palestinians in Jerusalem, and then of course Palestinians outside of Palestine, either as refugees or in the diaspora, they're all different. They're one community, but the occupation and colonization and exile affect these communities really, really differently. So that means that for Palestinians in Jerusalem who have access to the West Bank and to Israel, and they're in this weird place, which is legally by international law part of Palestine and the West Bank, but Israel has annexed it illegally, which was not recognized by anybody until Trump. And now there are a couple of other right-wing governments that have also recognized East Jerusalem as part of Israel. So, wow, it's like so hard. Like, do you go to the mall or you don't go to the mall? That's something we struggled with all the time. We could go to the mall. You couldn't go to the mall.
I could before I was 16, actually.
Right.
Before my dad got his
Right.
ID. So my dad was a Palestinian American, so no Palestinian ID means you're not a threat and you can go to the mall. And until I turned 16, I was underage, so I wasn't a threat. And then 16th birthday became a threat.
Right.
So yeah, I was able, but it's always a discussion. It's always a debate in school too. Like, are you a traitor for going to the mall? Are you for a one-state solution then? Like, it becomes very political. Such a simple discussion.
I know, because it's unfair. Like, if you're a kid, you want to go to the mall. And there's a mall in Ramallah.
No, there is.
Yeah, but it's not the same. And there's one, and it's just like, how many, not just years or decades, but generations deny themselves things that are right there in front of them? Or do you partake in it, or do you boycott it? It's very hard. So I guess I wanted that character to be able to help Ida navigate that, and to help readers navigate it a little bit. She's pretty honest, I think, about the trade-offs and how none of them are very good. None of them really are anything you can feel very good about. You're just always dancing with the possibilities and the constraints.
Yeah, I appreciated her realistic sense, I think. So I'm happy I asked that question actually. That clarifies some of the things that I had assumed. She takes Aida to Jerusalem, they go to a doctor appointment, they talk about like healthcare and how she has healthcare because she's able to go into Israel. So the trade-offs, I know it's a book for young adults, but I think any adult that reads the book will be able to infer some of these realities just through a sentence or two. Like it doesn't really elaborate on the difference in healthcare or rights depending on what kind of Palestinian you are in Palestine, but it definitely will I think create some intrigue. But I appreciated the aunt's realistic sense. Like they were sitting next to the soldiers, and she's like, "Well, that's kind of the reality we're in, and it's okay to enjoy a delicious pastry from a Jewish bakery. Like that's cool." So I appreciated that you brought that perspective, and her independence is definitely, as a Palestinian woman, that's the goal. That's where we're trying to go.
I should just say we used to go to the mall, not infrequently, until I don't know what the year that was, but the right across from the mall, Mel Hamal in Jerusalem, there's a sports stadium, and there was a sports event where the like all the team and all the fans came over to the mall and started beating up Palestinians. They beat up the cleaners, they beat up customers, they just went through and beat people up and screamed death to Arabs and stuff like that. After that, we never went back to the mall. It was frightening to think that we had gone there and, gotten candy at the candy store, and then this thing happened, and so things just shift in a moment. It's not like you know how to navigate stuff and then it lasts, because it's immediately called into question by something that happens.
It's a constant decision you have to make. I definitely agree with that. So I think we touched upon the sacrifice that Ida's mom had to do when going to the U.S. Towards the end of the book, Ida, after her journey with the magic olive and going to her village, learns a lot. Being there, she finally musters up the courage to ask her dad why they left Palestine. Definitely one of the more emotional parts of the book for me. I know we're close on time, so I would love to share that with the audience if you don't mind. It's page 119, and that's the father's answer to why they left Palestine.
So he says, where is it?
Glasses?
Oh, thank you.
It's your glasses.
Oh my God, thank you. My glasses. It was the second Intifada, the second time we rose up against the occupation, and the Israeli response was fierce. Palestine wasn't safe, especially for people our age. Mom nodded, encouraging him to continue. When our education was interrupted, the whole family pitched in to send us here to study. Then I got a job teaching phys ed, and we decided to stay for a while so that Danya could learn English while she was small and experience things she wouldn't have the opportunity to do there. As Dad spoke, his head was shaking, as if he himself didn't understand why they had stayed so long, and couldn't believe he was raising his children outside of his homeland. When you were born, Ida, we just stayed. I had a decent job by then, and our families kept telling us it was too difficult at home. It just gets worse and worse over there. It's not the Palestine we wanted to give you.
That last one broke my heart. It's not the Palestine we wanted to give you, because a part of me is like, that makes sense. I'm here. I chose to be here, right, because there are opportunities. But my immediate response was like, that's the Palestine we have. So we can't not be there. We can't, work for its improvement. So I pondered a lot about that and about the sacrifices, about the father just saying, had a good job. We were already here. That's one of my greatest fears. Every year I just stay because I have a good job. I have good opportunities. I've made a network of friends that have become like family. So it's a terrifying thought. So that was definitely one of the more emotional parts of the book for me. That, along with when the grandfather describes 1948 and how they were expelled from the village. But I know your family, much like mine, had somewhat of a hybrid life and a decision to be in one place or the other and maybe spend some time in both places. I was the opposite of Ida, so summers were in the US, but my school and everyday life was in Palestine. Ida was almost the opposite. I know your kids have spent some time in Palestine and now they're all over the world, actually not in the US. One of the things that I wondered when I finished the book is why you chose for Ida to be in the US and the magic olive to take her to Palestine and imagine a life where they hadn't left, as opposed to the opposite, being a Palestinian in Palestine and the magic olive taking her to somewhere more free, less restricted, not as much political drama these days. But I'm curious, was there, I don't know if it was more because of the personal experience or if there's any thought, it was just a question that I found myself thinking when I closed the last page.
I hope it doesn't show a lot in the book, but there's some things that are just really hard to do in writing, and you kind of have to rely on devices. So, in reality, most Palestinians can't move at all. Our family is lucky because I have a U.S. passport and now he does, and your family is lucky because your father had a U.S. passport. But most Palestinians have extreme difficulty moving at all. So the only way they can move is through magic, in a way, like in your mind. I just want to say that the experience that Ida has of being able to choose is a privilege that is not available to most Palestinians. It's an unusual experience. Since I wrote the book in English, because I can't write in Arabic, I can barely read Arabic, and I wrote it for US audiences, it seemed like I needed to somehow start with where readers might be and then take them on that journey. And I hope it doesn't look like a device in the book, but it kind of is a device, in the sense that when the book starts, Ida has never been to Palestine herself. So when she goes, she sees Palestine through her American eyes, and that's how I think readers will also see Palestine, through their American eyes. So it was a way of saying, we're going to start where the readers likely are and take them to where they would not be able to go, and have them not only see Palestine, but then see America through Palestinian eyes as well. So I don't know if I could have written the book the other way in English, because I don't know how it would have been understandable to people to plop them in Palestine, given the layers and layers and layers of misinformation, misrepresentation, stereotyping and racism that kind of is built into the air here. That's why I did it. I hope it worked.
I think it did. I think it's more relatable to be from Old Bridge, was it the name of the town in Massachusetts, for a reader that will be based here, and then transport to a different reality and learn about it. Awesome. I promised to leave time for questions, so the time has come. Are there any questions about the book, to Nora?
Or to Areen? It's okay if there aren't, but we also can tolerate silence. Jordan?
How do you navigate the sort of the balance between being an artist as a writer and an activist?
How do I balance being a writer and being an activist? I think I'm always an activist. It's not really a balance, but writing is one of the forms that my activism takes. Writing articles about stuff is almost how I have to work it out. So I just recently wrote an article about censorship of Palestinian children's books. I knew there was something there. I needed to learn about it, then I needed to frame it, then I needed to explain it, and it's somehow cathartic for me to do that. The fiction, though, is more of a challenge because I've never studied writing. I don't have an MFA in creative writing. I never went to, except for maybe a 4-day workshop in Ramallah, which was really important to my writing. I really don't, I don't know how to do it. I just do it, and then I hope it works. So it's not so much a balancing for me. I'm pretty clear. I'm a writer. I'm an activist. I'm an activist when I'm writing. I'm an activist when I'm teaching. I'm an activist when I'm activisting. That doesn't mean that I don't also hope that it is a strong literary piece, and I'm sure that my next one will be even stronger.
I understand why you started from the American perspective. It makes total sense. Start with what hopeful potential readers will feel familiar with. Was it always going to be Ida choosing, I'm giving it away to people, but choosing the ending you chose as opposed to choosing the other? Like, you know, she in the end, she chose one reality thread.
Yeah.
Did you always know she was going to choose that, or was that one of those things you played back and forth, and why did you decide that?
So the question is, did I know from the beginning that Ida would choose the United States, and why did I do that? But I don't know if I did that. That's a very interesting observation. I'm not at all convinced that I've done that. The story ended there, but that's not the end of her story. I mean, I don't know if Ida will stay in the United States or if she goes to Palestine, how long, when she might go, whether she goes in college or whether she goes and gets married there or whether she moves there to raise her kids there the way we did.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
We don't know where she's going to then take her life.
Right.
But she had two lives to choose from, and she chose one, not the other.
She had something she needed to do in Palestine, and she did it. And she had something she needed to do in the U.S., and she did it.
Okay.
But I don't know where she's going to stay. I don't know. My publisher just asked me if there's a sequel, and I was like, I very intentionally ended the book with the word Layla, because I think there's a story. I think Layla has a story. Layla is a friend in Palestine who's got an interesting story to tell, but I need to think more about what you're saying. Maybe I made the choice and it's not conscious to me, but I don't think so. I think the story just ended there. I think we don't know.
My read was she's going to keep taking olives until the olive jar is empty, so there's a few more trips to Palestine, potentially. It seemed to be her
What is a
escape.
bottomless jar.
Right.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Hey, is there a plan for the book to be translated to Arabic? And if it is, how do you expect the impact for Arabic books?
The questions about whether the book will be translated into Arabic is such an interesting question because it is really rare for books to be translated into Arabic, and if they are, they're like big books, like I don't know what, the Bible or something, right? What was that? Tolstoy, right? Tolstoy, not Nora Lester Murad. So I don't know if it'll ever be translated. Although if you would like to translate it, I would be happy to do that. What would the impact be? I'm kind of sad to say that when my girls grew up in Palestine, maybe this is your situation as well, an awful lot of what they read in school was translated from English to Arabic, and that was bad. So I don't want to contribute to that. I mean, they would be assigned, the same books that were being assigned here were being assigned there, and that was really bad. There are some fantastic kids' books in Arabic, written in Arabic for Arabic readers and speakers, but the school didn't tend to assign those, in my experience.
Yeah, it's true. We read Dickens and The Old Man and the Sea and all
Right.
those, but in Arabic. Actually, sometimes in both languages.
Right.
The disadvantage with most of those books, I would say, was just the quality of the translation. I mean, it's always hard to keep the integrity of the book in a language different than that it was thought about in, written in. But I do think there are books that do a good job and are translated in a way that I don't think loses the meaning. Some of the ones we read in school
Well, maybe
don't
we have to
apply.
ask her that question. What would it add anything? Would it be beneficial, and what might the reaction be?
I think the audience in that case would be Arabs outside of Palestine and Palestinians in the diaspora. So
Mhm.
like non-Palestinian Arabs, which is a huge population, and kids like I know, like Palestinians that learn Arabic, go to Arabic school in the U.S. I think they would benefit reading it, maybe relate to it a bit more. I'm not quite sure what the reaction would be, like by Palestinians in Palestine. I can see a dichotomy of like, yes, somebody wrote a book about us and our experience, and like kids in the US now understand and see, and we're not alone. Like, that's a huge thing we crave as kids there, and that might highlight it, especially if it's a book in English that was translated. But I can also see the other side of being like, to your point, Ida, myself, like we are privileged.
Mhm.
And so I wonder how a kid that does not have Ida's opportunity would feel. Comparing themselves to Palestinian kids that were able to get away.
Right.
So I can see both perspectives, but a good book would, I think, stir some of that. So
And then on top of it, there's like stuff that I put in. Let's say, for example, I put in Ida at a checkpoint. Ida goes through a checkpoint, but Ida didn't get interrogated the way my daughters did. I didn't put in the worst stuff, so I could see a Palestinian kid in, like, people that I know, children that I know, who've not just been under demolition order, but who have had their homes demolished. In one case, while they were in it.
Right.
I could see them going, well, this is nothing. Like you had to write this down. Like, it's not significant enough. I could see that as well. But if it happens and there's criticism, I'll take it.
doesn't hurt. It's just more readers.
Right.
The way that we can change our mind about people who we don't know is by meeting them. And it sounds like you're meeting Ida and learning about her life and feeling who she is. And it seems to me that this would be a very important book. Here we are in Brookline, for a lot of teenagers to read, to get to know. And I'm particularly talking as a Jew, for Jewish teenagers to read, and how that could influence them and their thinking about Palestine.
Thank you for that comment, and it reminds me to say something I had forgotten to say, which is that when I found out the book would be published, I became obsessed with how it could be used in schools, because my relatives who are 12, 13, 14 years old tell me that they get their book recommendations from their peers at school and from their teachers, and sometimes they're assigned or sometimes they get it from the school library, but that it really, really matters that schools embrace and provide that stamp of credibility for books. So I became obsessed with, since I teach graduate school, I don't teach in public school or K-12, like how do teachers find their books, and how do teachers decide what to teach, and do they teach Palestine, and if they teach Palestine, how do they teach Palestine, and what would they want to support their teaching of Palestine? So I interviewed and made relationships, I should say, with lots and lots of teachers all over the country in different grades and in different fields. And I found that there are a myriad of reasons why they don't teach Palestine in schools, some of which are obvious and some are less obvious. So then I wrote something to try to address what teachers' concerns might be, which Marcia helped me edit because she's a teacher. And I put that on the book's website. And one of the issues is there not being enough resources, teaching resources. So I started gathering lesson plans and portals and tools and all kind of films, and I put them in a spreadsheet, and I put the spreadsheet on the book's website under teaching resources. And then I realized that there's still big gaps. There are things that teachers need that aren't there. So I started reaching out to different groups of Palestinian teachers, non-Palestinian teachers, teachers in different disciplines. Let's create stuff. And I got myself involved in way too many little groups of creating stuff, but the stuff is so cool. For example, we are now presenting at the on Saturday, the National Council for Teachers of English, a framework for teachers and librarians to evaluate books for children involving Palestine. So when you pick up a book, how do you know if it's good? What should you be looking for? Other rock star teachers and educators like Debbie Reese have done these frameworks for other communities like Native American Indigenous communities. Read Debbie Reese, she is amazing, but there's nothing like that for Palestinian children's books. So we created it. That's just one example. I'm working with geographers on teaching Palestine with maps. They love to use maps, and now they're applying it in this situation. When that tool is done, it'll be published and available for free, of course, on my website, and I'm hoping that other teaching organizations will just take everything on my website and just take it. I mean, there's nothing proprietary about it, you know? So I agree that it is really important for the book to get read. Events like this, we're at a lovely, amazing, wonderful commercial neighborhood bookstore are one way. Teachers conferences are another. Neighborhood and community events or articles like the one I wrote on censorship, which was in School Library Journal. Book reviews, anything that you all could do to help me make it available so that someone who does want to say, hey, let me see if I can do this, could use this again as a gateway book to other books and to the whole topic. Because as long as Palestine is taboo in the United States, not only will Palestinians, children and adults, feel that lack of belonging, but non-Palestinian kids like your kids, right, and my relatives, miss out on a hugely important, valuable, lovely whole community of people who have a lot to offer in all realms because they've been somehow marked as problematic or controversial or dangerous in some way. So I think all of us have an interest in good teaching about Palestine in schools and the availability of good books that will expand our awareness. So that is why I'm so happy to be here tonight.
We are at time. That was a perfect way to end. Any final remarks, Nora, before we wrap up?
Did you have a question?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
So I expect if the book gets any play, which I hope it will, sounds wonderful, haven't read it,
Can you speak
that
louder,
that it will be subject to political attack, either by AIPAC, by these people who are banning books in certain states, by slanderous articles, perhaps even in the New York Times. How can we talk about Israel this way? That kind of stuff. I'm expecting. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about where you will go in that situation?
So the question is about, do I expect the book will be attacked, maybe banned or slandered or somehow like that? I would be naive if I didn't, because people who are much more powerful and credible than I am have faced all those kinds of attacks. Also, schools today are the frontline battleground for these kinds of, what do you call them, cultural wars or whatever, racism. So I do expect it to happen, but I don't exactly know how to prepare myself. I'm not a thick-skinned person. I'm a thin-skinned person. I understand intellectually that this is my job to do it, and I'm doing it. I will take all the risks, but when I get attacked, how will I handle it? I don't know. I have tried and am continuing to try to build lots of preemptive alliances, and that includes reaching out to the anti-book banners, so folks like PEN America, NCTE, American Library Association, all the anti-censorship people, and calling them out now on why are you not including Palestine in your advocacy. And I'm doing that, to call them in, not to call them out, but to create those alliances to increase awareness. And then we'll just have to see where this goes. Everybody who's here tonight is a potential ally, and it does require us to be more than supportive in our brains, but to take action to make space for other people and other views to be heard, and not just some other people, but all other people, and that includes Palestinians.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Call to action at the end, spoken like a true activist.
I do have a mailing list, and you can sign up for it and get notifications about the curricular tools as they come out, or other articles that I write. I love to have people on my mailing list. You can go to my blog at noralestermurad.com and sign up. And I'm also here to send books, right?
Yes, if you would like to start a line here in this aisle, it's all set up. We have Sharpies at the front, and thank you so much again for being here.